Rich Kid, welcome to the podcast.
Paul, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I've been watching this thing develop and I finally stoked up enough courage to join.
Well, I tell you what, now you and I spent a lot of time together at school because we were both on the karate team.
We did.
And we promised each other by email ahead of time we were not going to go down a lot of roads about the karate team. But when you're on a club with a friend, really for three, because we both joined as yearlings,
That's right.
we did that for 3 years together. So we were teammates in a way.
We were. We traveled. We had fun.
Yeah.
It was a great experience.
Yeah. But we always start with where we are now because classmates have modest attention spans. So talk about where you are now and what's going on with you in your
All right.
life.
I live in Alexandria, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
I run my own little strategic advisory business focused on energy transition, sustainability, climate resilience. I'm on a board and advise and support a number of startup companies, management consulting, private equity. It's pretty fun.
That's great. And you think Alexandria is home for a good bit? It's a nice place.
Well, one of the things I guess we're going to explore is our grand plans never really actually come to fruition. So my wife and I got married my last year in the UN. We lived overseas in Pakistan, and we came back to Washington, D.C. Just for a couple of years to pad our resumes before we moved back to the West Coast, right? So she's from Hawaii. I'm from Oregon. Our big plan was to settle on the West Coast. And, now 28 years later, we're still in DC. So gravitational pull.
Collecting the padding. That's a lot of padding, 28
We're
years.
still padding our resumes, looking for somebody who will hire us in Oregon or California.
Right.
So
Because the standards are tough out there.
they are. It's hard to find a job in Oregon where you said, "Oh yeah, I worked for in the Department of Defense for 14 years." So
yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
yeah.
It's tough out there. It's tough. What a journey you've had mentioning the Pakistan and just looking at your LinkedIn profile. Actually, I had to read through it 3 times because half the words in it I didn't understand. But we'll get to all that. A kid from a small town, West Oregon, was that considered a suburb of Portland where you were?
We were the last stop. We were the last stop on the bus line from Portland. So it took about an hour and a half by bus to get into Portland.
Right. You were on the very edge of civilization.
That's right.
Because the bus did make it out to Forest Grove, Oregon, because of the bus, because it took so long on the bus. Well, now that we've started with a story of malfeasance, so what were you? Were you an athlete? I knew you were an athlete because you were certainly agile when I knew you. But were you an athlete in high school? What more of an academician?
Yeah, no, Paul. Actually, I was not much of an athlete.
Okay.
I had academics and student government and other things going for me, and I realized if I wanted to get into West Point, I needed a varsity letter. So my small high school had 8 varsity slots on the tennis team, but only 6 players. So I figured that was my path to a varsity letter. So I got a varsity letter as a junior, and then again as a senior.
If there ever was a club at West Point, we should have had the Slot 7 Club. we were all varsity athletes on that 7th slot there.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
What got you interested in West Point all the way back then?
Yeah. So, sort of, it's the family business.
Okay.
So if you believe my family lore, and it may or may not be true, but it's the lore I grew up with. We've been serving. The Kidd family came as indentured servants from Scotland because Kidd means goat herd. So we were struggling in Scotland, worked for our freedom, and then joined the militia. And we've got records that say we were members of the ranks when Major Washington wore the colors of the king, and we fought the French and the Indians and got a little land in Virginia. And so we can trace, military service pretty much through the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. Family fought on both sides, and then all the recent wars. So my grandfather was shake and bake. He went from an E5 to a lieutenant, and in World War II, started World War II as an E5, ended up as a major and commanding a battalion. My dad started as a National Guard officer and did 3+ years in Vietnam. So
Yeah.
my worldview was very limited, I should say. So
Yeah. Well, whether or not the family lore, that was what you heard growing up, so certainly
that's right.
had a strong influence on you.
That's right.
Okay.
And the closer to modern times, the more true it was. My grandfather did indeed fight in World War II. He
Right.
just rotated out of the line when Bastogne happened, and Patton put him back in, and they moved north to
Oh boy.
fight into Bastogne. So anyway,
Okay,
that
so
was
he had a real run. There
yeah,
you
yeah.
go.
You know,
Huh?
he was there. So
So all those stories growing up in West Point was the outcome of that. And then, so you got on the academics. You must have been strong in to offset the rather gamed
well,
tennis
yeah.
spot.
Yeah, well, strong-ish. You know, my great success in going to West Point was picking where I applied from.
Ah,
So, you know,
okay.
Oregon in the early '80s, you know, Oregon was still the bastion of the leftover hippies.
Yep.
You know, I applied when I talked to my guidance counselor. He said, "No one from our high school goes to West Point. You should come up with something else." So I was advised against it. Uh, And but anyway, I did go ahead and apply, and frankly, there was two of us from our high school, the
Huh.
first and second ever from our high school, myself and a classmate Steve Davis. So we went in, and the
Ah,
guidance counselor never congratulated me, or Steve, for getting in. But anyway,
right. And where you apply from is an important thing that we find out in the long view of time, right?
in
So,
the long view of time, that's right. So
you know, if you're from some thickly populated area of Texas, you're really fighting your way in. Where
yeah,
you and myself from some of the hinterlands, we had a little less competition,
we
particularly in 1981, which the military was not that popular at the time.
that's right, that's right. So we yeah, I picked my competition. That's been a key to my success for most of my life.
That's right. Certainly in the karate dojo, when you were whooping up on me, you picked your competition well. So good for you. When you got there, so even though you had the family lore, when you got there, was it a shock or did you do any prep ahead of time?
Yeah, Paul, I was so unprepared, right? I, I, I had no clue what I was getting into. I got put on a plane from Oregon,
Yeah.
flew into to New York City, stayed in this place called the Barbizon Hotel. One of our
Yeah.
classmates shared this, and there was no air conditioning in our room, and the windows were open, and New York City was so loud,
Yeah.
and I couldn't sleep, and I was terrified that someone was going to come in the window and steal my below quarters or whatever
Low
I had.
quarters. The only thing I got are these low quarters, and somebody's
That's
going
right.
to steal them.
And so I was pretty much awake all night, and we get on the bus in New York City in Manhattan. I fall asleep, and an hour and a half later, I wake up in Mikey Stadium. So that was my, you know,
Yeah.
and then it was just a
Then it
blur.
was a blur. Absolutely.
So
And how did Beast Company? Which company were you in? How did that land? Who was around you in terms of classmates that you remember?
uh, I remember almost nothing from Beast. I remember, you know, some of the classmates later on, you know, more so than Beast. Yeah. So the march back, I did the march back with my son, and anyway, that was an amazing
Yeah.
experience. But so plebe year, I was in D2, had a couple of roommates.
Hmm.
You know, the great thing, one of my roommates was Dan Hokinson,
Oh yeah.
and
That's
so when I retired, Dan, my D2 first semester roommate, General Dan Hokinson
yeah.
on the Joint Chiefs. He did my retirement speech, so that
Oh,
was
how about
that.
that?
Yeah, so he retired me from federal service. So that was really
And
nice
we
to
said
have.
hello to each other, you and I, at Dan's
Yeah,
retirement as
yeah.
well. So there you go.
So that was really special. D2 was
Yeah.
good. Um, made a lot of friends. You know, some shout outs. Ulrich Breckbuell got me through plebe English because I'd bring
There
my
you go.
paper in, and Ulrich would write all over it, and then I'd acknowledge his work and pocket my B plus, and I was so happy.
When one can acknowledge Ulrich Breckbuell, one is in good shape. because you
Yes.
probably got a solid paper going in there.
I got a solid paper. I was
The
not
man can
real,
write a paper.
I wasn't real academically prepared either, coming from a rural school and public high school in Oregon.
Right.
So, so it was hard. I wanted to quit. I went up to the whatever that counselor place is where you get your free food and you sit with somebody. So they said, well, what do you like during the day? What's the one thing you like? And of course, I had to think through this, right? Had plebe boxing and my face was all beat up and all that. So I said, well, I like reading the New York Times. I
Mm-hmm.
like reading the international affairs portion of the New York Times. Okay. So the counselor said, well, why don't you do this thing called SCUSA? All right. The
Yeah.
student, so it's focused on international.
Yeah.
And he said, you won't make a table as a freshman. No freshmen ever do, but you should just do it and it'll be interesting. So I somehow managed to carve some time out of my schedule and
Yeah.
did the whole SCUSA prep. And I actually made it as a freshman. I was one of 2 freshmen that year that
Good
made
for
SCUSA.
you.
So
Yeah.
then I did SCUSA, and so we're there, and of course the upperclassmen, they're like, all right, well, we're going to go hang out with the civilians and party, and you, knucklehead freshman, you're going to have to write up everything from the from the events
From
and
the
the table,
proceedings. That's
from the
right.
proceedings, right?
Yeah.
Well, I worked with this young guy. Our resource was a young guy from the National Security Council named Link Bloomfield.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I have met, and so if we're going to talk about my life trajectory,
Yeah.
Lincoln is my longest and oldest professional associate.
Is that right?
And
You met him
so
at SCUSA as a plebe.
I met him at SCUSA as a plebe. I was smart enough to send him a Christmas card every year. And then when I was in the UN and traveling around the world. So then fast forward, my last UN assignment was in Afghanistan. My wife and I lived in Pakistan. I started to write and talk about the Talibs, I think, as you know, and our classmates know, because Roger, I guess I was a guest speaker. I forget what reunion, right after 9/11.
Yeah.
And he was a pretty senior guy in the Bush administration.
Okay.
So he called me and said, Rich, we need you. Come to work. So 2 weeks later, I was already in DC, but 2 weeks later, I was in working in the Bush administration. But the point, the point from SCUSA is in my sort of survival mode as a freshman, trying to find something to keep me there. I found international relations, international affairs,
Yeah.
SCUSA, which then, fast forward through life, through decisions I made in
There's an
graduate
amazing
school.
lesson in that story, though. And we were talking about it before we started
Yeah.
recording about the different things that the totality of the podcast has observed is the fact that you sent Christmas cards to that person that you met as an 18-year-old freshman in college is the thing that laid groundwork. And it's those types of relationships and the fact that all that lined up so that you had that one contact open doors for you later, right? So that's great.
Yeah. No, it is. And it's it's a question of opportunity and being ready to being available and open to opportunity. Almost all the conscious decisions I made as a young man, like from the age 15 to 25, were wrong. That when I sat and made a deliberative decision, none of them were the right decision, or were not the best. But it was those things where I didn't recognize it at the time, but where I followed instincts or things that were of interest to me that actually were, sort of set my path and paid benefits over time.
Yeah. Now, you went to F4, the famous F4. Good
Went
group
to
over
F4,
there.
the Fighting Frogs.
The frogs, yeah.
And life got better, right? After you ended up the plebe year, we were over in the north area, living in the old barracks, and just made some great friends, and everything got a lot better for me in F4. And I still go on vacation with some of my F4 classmates. We try to get together every year, every other year, and it's great.
My company mates send me pictures of themselves on vacation. I don't know why I don't get invited.
I don't believe that.
You must have been a popular guy. That's great. F4 has got a great group, some super characters in that. And did you take the international relations bit further to SCUSA? You continued on with that?
Yeah, no. So, we had to major. So we couldn't major. So we had to concentrate. So I concentrated in international relations. That's what I liked. I mean, if I could read a history book and write a paper, it was easy.
Yep.
If I had to do equations, it was hard. So that was sort of steered me away from all of that. I remember I had high school calculus, and I tested into advanced placement calculus as a beanhead, and I was doing fine for like 3 weeks. And then
Yeah.
one day, and I got this assignment, and like I knew nothing. Right, my high school advanced calculus got me about 3 weeks in, and so
Yeah.
after a week or two of misery, the professor and I mutually agreed that I needed to.
Like one of
So
those
back, so
pachinko balls, you went down
that's
the
right. I had to
section, right?
bounce down a few levels.
Right. I had a similar experience. Yeah, that old high school advanced placement course could really goof you up. What
Yeah.
got you interested in karate? Obviously, that's where we met. What got you interested in that?
Well, I mean, look. I was, as you said, I was not an athlete. I was not. I was really intimidated by our classmates. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
our classmates, their physical fitness, their prowess, their stamina, and so I took martial arts simply to make myself stronger and a little more credible. I mean, there's
That's
no
great.
real reason other than that. So,
You were an enthusiast, though. You enjoyed it.
oh
You
no,
were,
I enjoyed it. Practiced on and off
yeah.
for a couple of decades. It sort of contributed to some of my bad decision making. I thought I was going to graduate and go to Korea, where I was going to study karate, martial arts up in the hills with some Korean master, and come back the next Chuck Norris. But then, of course, the realities of being an infantry lieutenant, when you're in the field half your time, and the other half of the time you're in the motor pool, and you're confined. We were confined to Camp Casey. We were confined to like a 3 mile radius. Anyway, so
Right. Very few kung fu masters arose from the motor pool.
exactly, exactly. And of course, and my language at school was German. I had German in high school, German at West Point. Why didn't I go to Germany? Anyway,
Yeah.
just
Boy,
no rational reason when I look back now. But anyway.
right. And then, so we had to march. So you were still a marching cadet, right? Because we were not a formal club, so we still had to go back and enjoy
Yeah,
some time on the plane.
yeah, we had to march. We had to march. So I drilled all 4 years.
Yeah, there you
So
go. Well, we marched to the D1 schools, I like to say, and that's all we
that's right.
did. Infantry. What was it about infantry other than becoming a martial arts grandmaster that
Just
attracted you?
again, it was just family heritage.
Okay.
That's what my dad did. That's what my grandfather did. I didn't really think about it. I mean, in hindsight, another branch might have been better aligned with my personality and interests, but just the gravitational pull of family heritage sent me towards the infantry.
Yeah. And graduated infantry, an infantry officer, headed to Korea as your first assignment, as you just said, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what it was like when you finally got out there and were fulfilling the family legacy. Another infantryman in the family.
Look, my 5.5 years in the Army was great. I enjoyed it. It was not remarkable in any stretch of the imagination, right? It was a solid. I was a solid lieutenant. I had nothing real particularly exciting. I enjoyed Korea. I enjoyed the culture. An interesting thing. I was just cleaning out my parents' house, and my mom saved everything, and as a consequence, I saved everything.
Hmm.
Found this entire box of letters that all of our classmates, my friends, had sent me while I was in Korea. Because somewhere in
Yeah.
there I'd said, oh, send me letters because I'm not going to have much of a social life. And it was really interesting to find this box and look at all of these folks who had written me letters or postcards over the years. And so going through that box made me feel a lot more connected to our classmate, made me feel a lot more generous to people that I've haven't thought about or interacted with for a while, and it also made me, how should I say, the lost art of letter writing.
Yeah.
Who writes a letter anymore? And that's actually how my wife and I fell in love. We wrote letters back and forth for a couple of years as I
Is
traveled.
that right?
So letters are important. Anyway,
Handwriting is coming back
who
in
listen to
vogue.
this, you wrote me a letter when I was in Korea. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
There you go. There you go. If I was clever, I'd have like all the list of the names on the thing, but I'm not that clever.
Yeah.
All these people wrote Rich a letter when he
Only
was in
about four
Korea.
people, and most of them are asking, "Hey, Rich, you still owe me. You still owe me money from TG,
Right. Yeah. Everybody that the other side of the screen, everyone who Rich owes money to, then everyone wrote a
yeah,
nice letter, not a collection letter. So where did you come? So you did Korea, then you came back to a second assignment in the
I then
States.
went back to Fort Lewis,
Fort Lewis.
so uh, which was close to home, so I could sort of be with my parents in the
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest. That was a good assignment. Again, interesting decisions. I was scheduled to be the officer in charge of the ROTC cadet hand grenade range for the whole summer. And I thought,
Really?
there's nothing good that's going to come from this,
There's
right?
no upside to that
There's
job.
no upside. So I went in and I volunteered. I said, send me to any school in the Army, right? Any school in the Army just to get me
Yeah.
out. So I ended up going to the S4 course and became an infantry battalion S4,
Okay.
which was instrumental later on in the United Nations because when I got my job in the UN, I was emergency logistics officer. And I told the UN
Yeah.
guys, I can move anything anywhere in the world by any mode of transportation because I was an infantry S4.
There you
and
go.
and they believed it. So, but yeah, my battalion commander was a guy named Pete Corelli, who went on to be the vice chief of the Army.
Uh-huh.
He was a pretty driven dude. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working for him.
So 5.5 years brought you to 91-ish, 92. What
Yeah.
was in your head about that time? We were the drawdown, all that stuff was going on, of course, but
Yeah.
where was your head?
Yeah. So look, Corelli had kept me there to do an NTC rotation, so I was out of cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to the advanced course. I hadn't done the things I wanted to do as a lieutenant. The Army was downsizing. My branch said I couldn't go back to a troop unit because I had almost 5 years in a troop
Mm-hmm.
unit. Didn't go to the Gulf War. All the big wars were over. So I decided to leave. Also, I felt a little constrained, frankly, right? You sit in the advanced course and they got that chart up on the wall. It tells you every job you're going to have. You're going to be a
Right.
company commander, then you're going to be deputy S3 and this and that. And so I just felt really constrained with that. And I wanted to try something new. So I had both things that were pushing me out and things that were pulling me out. But frankly, I'm a little bit like I hadn't fully lived up to our commitment of lifetime service.
Uh-huh.
So I felt a little incomplete upon departure, excited about what was to come next. But, frankly, I was conflicted when I left.
Yeah.
Didn't have I'd done fine, but I hadn't met some of my perhaps unrealistic expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then,
so then I went to graduate school, went to Yale, which was great. Management program.
yeah.
As they said, as officers, we were managers, but I just loved it. I just loved the freedom, and I took all sorts of extra courses, and all my extra courses were in international affairs and grand strategy. And then I ended up my second year being a teaching assistant for a guy named Paul Kennedy, who wrote the book Rise and Fall of Great Powers.
Yeah.
So I taught. I taught in the history department. He offered me a slot as a PhD student, but I just couldn't handle more debt and another 5 years at Yale.
Yeah.
So I turned that down and then joined the United Nations.
But you must have had some skills there. I mean, because not everybody who goes through the program gets to immediately teach and then is offered a slot like that, right?
Yeah.
You took to
so
it.
Again, it's your logic, right? So
Yeah.
I'm living on borrowed money, right? So whatever I'd saved as a lieutenant plus borrowed money. And I just walked around. It says, such and such symposium, free lunch, right? So go to this grand strategy symposium. And I'd had a class in grand strategy at West Point, and it was free lunch. Well, I didn't read the fine print. It's basically a PhD candidates. Only, if you're not a PhD student, you don't go. It's just one of these unspoken norms of these elite academic institutions that if you're going to meet with Paul Kennedy and Gaddis and these other great professors, you got to be a PhD student. Well, I didn't know any
Right.
better, so I just showed up. Free food,
Right.
free sandwich, free cookie. I was
What's your
happy.
strategy, Mr. Kid? Well, free lunch.
Free lunch. That's my strategy. But I was following my interests, and anyway, so I got to hang out with him, and then kind of also again a surprise, but he was I mean, teaching assistant. There was 8 or 9 of us, right? There was 300, 400 undergraduates come in for his Monday lectures, and then
Yeah.
we'd all have sections that we'd meet with throughout the week. So again, I sort of picked my competition. There wasn't enough. There wasn't enough teaching assistants, so he asked me to do that, and then and that was great because it subsidized my second year of graduate school.
Okay.
And so, and I took other classes on the international affairs track.
Yeah. All right. So you have a talent for that topic.
What, finding free lunch?
Well, you've always had a talent for that. That bus going into Portland, there's a lot of free lunches begotten, I'm sure. But yeah, clearly, if he asked you to be, anyway, I point out for our audience's benefit that you're being very modest, but clearly you had a talent at it that you did rise above the crowd, which is great. So,
But I was also paying
to do a PhD.
Yeah, I was also paying a buttload of money to learn things like corporate finance and accounting, where I was
Right.
supposed to make my future. And don't ask me about
Which
either of the subjects that I paid money for, right?
I should have written you a letter in Korea and said, "There's equations in that. Stay
There's
away
equations
from
right there. And all those debts you owe from Fort Benning, they're accruing interest.
that. Just stay away from the equations. It's just there's no good to be found in it."
So,
And so from there, you got the UN job. The UN job came up next.
yeah. So again, so I hadn't. So people showed up at Yale and they were
Yeah.
driven, right? They had a plan. I didn't have a plan, right? My plan was just to learn new things, and so
Right.
trying to get a job was actually hard for me. But I
Yeah.
ended up with 2 job offers, and I applied for the UN, and they rejected me. And then a week later, they called me back and they said, "Look, actually, we've got a job for you in Tajikistan. We need to know today if you'll take it." And I said, and so I was looking at a job as a management consultant in New Jersey and helping to run a factory in Rhode Island. Those were my 2 job offers. I wasn't excited about either one. And so I accepted on the spot. So I accepted this job in Tajikistan. So this is 1993, right? So I then go to the Yale Library to get the atlas out. And I open it to Africa.
Right.
Tajikistan is in the middle of Central Asia.
Yeah, not Africa. Yeah.
I had accepted a job in a country that I had no idea where it was. And I was only off by like 6,000 miles.
Right. No amount of SCUSA work could have corrected that. It's all the way over there. That's funny. So
I got on a plane. I got 4 days of training. I got $50,000 in cash in a bag that I had to carry through the Moscow airport. So you land on one airport, you take it. So if anyone, I probably should have been dead in Moscow, but and then I flew in and I went out and just started doing S4 stuff. Like so I was feeding refugees, and so the food was about 6 weeks behind me, and I just had to what's the beneficiary load, how much food needs to go where, what's the transportation capacity. So I just started buying or renting trucks, warehouses, trains, anything I could, and just started moving food.
Yeah. So that S4 job came in, or the S4 course as well came in handy.
Yeah. So anyway, so I did that, and then 7 years with the UN, all over the world.
All overseas, the 7 years?
Yeah. So I didn't live in America for 7 years. So I got 7 years without taxes because I made it a point to stay out of America.
Amazing. And then, so I looked at your LinkedIn. You served in quite a few theaters or locations, right? I mean, Tajikistan was only one.
I got the reputation of being good. So I never heard a shot in anger, right? Never heard a shot in anger in the Army. I got pretty good at being calm under pressure in war zones around the world. So that's what I got, was more war zones. The good news, when you get shot at the UN. There's no requirement like as a lieutenant or captain where you have to show poise and maneuver troops and tech things or react under contact. You just
Right.
run away, right? It's just like a bad Monty Python movie. If you get shot
Yeah.
at the UN, you run away. So I run away on 3 different continents. And
There's no need for dignity when you're in the UN.
no need, no, it is how fast can you get out of here, right? And
Right.
let's, and if you don't get in the car before I do, I'm going to leave you behind. No, it wasn't
Right.
quite that bad, but yeah,
Leave every man behind.
yeah. So anyway, so that was fun, but that was, but
What
here's,
was the oddest situation you found yourself in? Like a situation where you said, I could never actually explain this to anybody when I went back home. Those of us who've served overseas in different civilian capacities, you must have found a position where you just said, how on earth did I get here? Is
well,
there one that comes to mind?
there were a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Kind of putting you on the spot, but
No. So I'm trying to. I mean, look, a young man stuck a hand grenade in my car and asked me if I wanted to die a Christian or convert and
ah,
to be a Muslim. So anyway, we just sort of
that's one. That's called a compelling argument.
that is. But no, I mean, this is sort of more spiritual.
Yeah.
I just saw the suffering around the world
Yeah.
and the horrible things people did to one another, and then sort of had to question, how could there be a kind, benevolent God and allow this to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And so, would then kind of renounce my faith, but then you'd see people sacrificing their last bit of bread or sharing their blanket or doing things to help others
Mm-hmm.
when they had nothing, right? And so some of these people who had so little, were so much more generous than I was or the rest of America
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. So that sort of then restored my faith. So that was a
No,
cycle
that's interesting. Yeah.
of discovery and awareness over time. Um, you know,
Hmm.
I'm not in favor of mandatory prayer at West Point by any means, but
Right.
but anyway, it was a sort of a faith journey. And that was compelling. I mean, look, this is I don't want to tell you all these stories because this is actually my retirement plan, Paul. I've got all these UN stories, and then what I want
We're
is
gonna blow it here.
all the classmates. If I just want to put out some teasers, and then they're going to say, "Hey, look, I'm going to invite Rich to my vacation house for a week."
I got
And
it.
then I've got a week's worth of stories, and then I'll just do that again. So
Consider this
all my
consider this a
classmates
marketing.
invite me over for vacation, and then you can hear the rest of the stories.
I love it. So we're dropping a little, we're dropping some hints here to get people interested, and then if you can, we've already determined that the free lunch is a very important part of the
That's
program.
right.
So if you could provide the free lunch, you hear a story.
Yeah. Now I'm a little older, wiser, so I don't want just free lunch. I want like free happy hour, preferably with a nice view.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. Okay. Well, this is good. Hopefully we can accelerate you into this program. You can live charmingly on your stories for many years to come.
That's right.
So that was a solitary journey. And then how did you meet? You began your letter writing campaign with your wife prior to being together.
I met my wife at graduate school, and
okay, you did.
We did different things and different interests at graduate school, but
Yeah.
we were friends. We had coffee. We sought each other out to be on the same work groups.
Yeah.
And then as I went overseas, postcard here, letter there, one thing led to another. Fell in love, had an international relationship for a while. She's into nonprofit management, arts and museums.
Okay.
So then we started to travel the world together. She was getting me to appreciate beauty and painters and art and all these other things that I had no appreciation for, like Caravaggio.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known that without my wife.
That's right.
So anyway, and so yeah, I came back. I don't know where I was, and I said, "Oh,
tell me how you met." And so you had a letter writing campaign with her for a long time. How long from? So the whole 7 years you were traveling around, you were
just
writing
pretty
letters?
much. So well, for anyway. So I came back from a UN assignment, and I'd just gotten assigned to Pakistan and working in Afghanistan. And believe it or not, that was my first family duty station. Everything else was unaccompanied. All right. So
Yeah.
I basically said, hey, my next assignment is a family duty station. How would you like to get married and come with me? And she said yes.
Oh,
So
that's
we
great.
got we got engaged in January. I then left. She planned everything. I showed back up for the wedding,
Mm-hmm.
got
And
married,
what
and away we
year
went.
was that? You married in
98. We got married in
98.
98.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Pakistan was a garden spot in '98. It got a little frothy after that, right?
Well, the garden spot was, so while we were there was the first missile strikes against Bill Clinton, and Pakistan tested its nuclear weapon. So all the Americans were told to evacuate, but we were with the UN, not with
Right.
the not under the American embassy. So we stayed,
Yeah.
and it was fun. So we were like one of only a handful of American couples left in Islamabad, and we went up for something. Oh, we went up to the embassy for the Marine Corps birthday because the embassies
Mhm.
had so my wife was like the only woman there, so she got to dance with all the Marines over and over again.
She had a busy night.
Yes.
Right.
So anyway,
And then how did you all deal with the fact that you were busy there with your role and then she was in Islamabad? How did she adjust to that? Because that's overseas living often as one of the spouses is usually the plus one, right?
yeah. So she gave up a pretty good job at the Guggenheim in New York. Came out, worked as the accountant slash treasurer for the American School, and then
Okay.
helped with a nonprofit called Society for Preservation of Afghan Culture. And
Hmm.
basically, it was a nonprofit that bought and hid Afghan antiquities from the Taliban and
No
protected
kidding.
them for,
Yeah.
and then the antiquities were released under the after, I forget when, like 2010, 2000, under Karzai. They were all put back into the Afghan museums and other
Right.
things. Now we don't know the fate of those. But anyway, again, that
Yeah.
was her calling is culture and arts, and so she followed her calling as well.
And she found a role, which just shows you that anywhere in the world you can find a thing of in the area that you're interested, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
good for
So
her. Okay. So Pakistan was your first, but then you go on
yeah, so
quite
that
a
was a big
run, right?
career decision. So I
Yeah.
then got offered a perm. So all of this time, the first 7 years, was all contract work.
Right.
So as a UN staff member, I contributed to retirement, but it was all contract.
Hmm.
So after the year in Pakistan, I was offered a full-time UN position, which was pretty rare for a white American male who didn't speak any of the UN languages.
Right.
So we really had and now I was typecast as emergency operator. So I was
Okay.
just, my career was a, a bigger role in a bigger disaster over and over again.
Right.
And it's interesting for the relief workers. I was fortunate that I got married, but most of the relief workers, similar to, like war correspondents, maybe some of our special operators, they not stable in their relationships, use
Hmm.
a lot of drugs, alcohol, self-medicate from the things they've seen and the stress they've been under. And I saw that as a future, and my wife and I consciously decided, no, we're not going to do that. So I chose not to take the UN position, which surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we came back to Washington, D.C., as I said, to pad our resumes and then go West Coast. I started a small NGO, which was focused on, with another guy, which was focused on post-conflict. So we were trying, the problem with aid and assistance is it didn't flow to the points of need. So we were using this new thing called GIS mapping and
Hmm.
other things to kind of identify where assistance would have the most benefit in a post-conflict society.
Right.
So I was working with that, starting up the NGO, just, making payroll, skipping my salary so that folks could have stuff. It was tight, right? So
So how do you
we
go? Like, what was the through line of interest? So opportunities would come your way. What was the thing that drew you into that? kind of work? You started the S4 experience, then became an emergency operator, then this was just kind of one consistent theme, and opportunities came your way. How did that work?
Yeah, so this one was again people I'd met. They'd asked me to apply. It was actually a job opening in The Economist. So I have actually, if you've ever read I have actually gotten a job out of The Economist. That might be my biggest
No
claim to
kidding. I
fame.
didn't know those were real.
Neither did I. So this guy was basically it was interesting. Consortium of 8 not NGOs that were active in demining and had helped drive the Ottawa Treaty had founded a consortium had founded another NGO. So I was
Right.
one of 2 people to help grow that NGO out, which was doing, and then 9/11 happened, and then I started talking about Afghanistan, and then Link Bloomfield called me and said, "Hey, how would you like to come to work on Afghan policy in the State Department?" So the through line, again, I was starting to make some more deliberative decisions thanks to the fact that I was making them with my wife, but we wanted to come back to America. We'd chosen to return to the United States and
Yeah.
not live the life of an international expat. Um,
Right.
and Washington, D.C. was a place where we could both get jobs. So she got a job right off the bat when we got back here. And so it's sort of been that way
Yeah.
ever since. I had no plans of staying in the federal government. So I got a 2-year term appointment in the Bush administration to work Afghan policy issues. So that's all I'd signed up for. 9/11 happened. I said, look, I'm going to go back, serve my country again for a couple of years, and then see what happens. So, but
Well,
then I got
I
in.
asked this question on behalf of all the classmates who haven't, and we have quite a few classmates who've walked similar miles in those shoes of being in the policy realm. Was the idea there that you just had so much domain knowledge that you were tapped for a perspective on a thing, or you were out researching things you knew less about? How did that being in
No, it's
policy
domain
work? How did that
knowledge.
work?
Look, I was in so many things that we now take for granted about Afghanistan, we didn't
Mm-hmm.
know at the time, right? Like Afghanistan is a tribal society, right?
Right.
You have to understand the human terrain. You can't operate in certain ways. So we have to
Right.
operate differently. Give a shout out in the early days to one of our classmates, Dave DeRoche.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dave's teaching at the War College. He was the XO of a civil affairs battalion that got deployed to Afghanistan and was doing traditional civil affairs. I was in the State Department. There was a couple of other of us, and we knew right then that from day one we were in a counterinsurgency. It's traditional counterinsurgency. We've got to fight for legitimacy. The victory is not on terrain or the number of people you kill. It's whether or not the people of Afghanistan view the government as the most legitimate one. But
Right.
Donald Rumsfeld and his team had said, we could not use the words, literally could not use the word insurgency or counterinsurgency in any interagency policy discussion the first 2 years of the war. And if you said them, whoever was in the meeting with you, the Marine Corps general or the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense would correct you and say, we are not in a counterinsurgency. We are fighting counterterrorism. Of course, counterterrorism is a tactic, not a form of warfare. And
Right.
anyway, so Dave DeRoche, and to his credit, was so much smarter than I am. He said, "Look, we're in a counterinsurgency. What can we do without calling it a counterinsurgency?" So Dave, myself, a couple of other folks, we wrote the concept paper for the PRTs, Provisional Reconstruction Teams. So,
Yeah.
and we wrote the concept paper, got it sent up through the National Security Council, got that approved, and nowhere in the justification do we say insurgency or counterinsurgency, but it's a classic counterinsurgency, technique to put folks out on the ground, start to win hearts and minds, provide security, provide.
But you safely avoided the term.
We safely avoided the term, and it was great because Dave and I used the West Point connection. As like as a back channel or secondary channel to affect U.S. policy.
There you go.
If Dave wouldn't have been there, and if I wouldn't have been there, it may not have come out the way it did. So, kudos to West Point, the connections we make as classmates, and to Dave's and his brilliance.
Dave's a unique and talented guy as well. So
So anyway, I worked policy issues, then got put in an SES slot. If I stayed, I got an SES slot. So then I converted, stayed, was in an SES slot, didn't make SES for a few more years, but found I really, really liked public service. I enjoyed everything that was there. Loved the State Department, but was spending about 2 weeks a month overseas. So, and we'd had a child, and I'd also come to the realization in all those wars that I'd been to and all the places in the UN, that even though there was a political dimension to conflict, there was also a resource, an underlying competition for resources, food, timber, water, energy. And I said, look, I'm on the wrong side of the equation. If I'm the guy that responds to conflict, I'm going to be continually just kicked in the face for the rest of my life. And so now my decision making was getting a lot better and a lot more deliberative. And I said, look, I want to live a life of purpose. I've been very fortunate to have done that. But to make a long-term difference, I got to get on the other side of the equation and address how resources are used, resource efficiency, resource scarcity, try to work for abundance and resilience. So I made the conscious decision to move to the Department of Energy, which then sort of defined the second half of my career. I did a deliberate pivot. I went to the Department of Energy for an organization that.
How does one do that? That's super. I mean, for those of us again who haven't walked a mile in your shoes, you're working in policy. You're in a high level slot.
I wasn't mid-level shot. I wasn't high level there.
Much higher than many of us.
Upper mid-level, or So
if there's a bell curve, you're well up the curve. Let's put it that way.
But certainly don't confuse me with Mike Pompeo or Mark Esper. I was not
for a minute.
I was not on the seventh floor. I was in the trenches.
That's totally fine, right? And so then you decide with this insight around the being on the abundance side of it, you want to go over to the Department of Energy. How do you do that in that world? Do you reach out to people?
Yeah. How did I do that? I don't know. Somebody I knew said that they're looking. So this was the tail end of the Bush administration. I was a non-career. I'm non-political. I'm a career. I've worked though with all the politicals who know each other. And they said, hey, there's this guy and he's trying to rebuild some broken offices over in the Department of Energy. So I got referred. I went over. I interviewed for the job. I basically said, I don't know anything about energy, but I know a lot about management. And teams and leadership. So there was an organization called the Federal Energy Management Program. At that point, the Republicans wanted to shut it down. They'd given it 1 year probation to see if it could deliver in 1 year. So I took a job on a 1 year probation. So I gave up job security to go back to go into something where I didn't have job security. But I felt it was important, and I really enjoyed that. So I did some basic management stuff. Like the organization had 3 different mission statements. One on the website, one So it was stuff that we learned as very young adults, right?
Right.
What's your purpose? What's your mission? So I just did that stuff, and we survived, and we got more money, and we passed a couple of audits, and so I was there for 3 years, and then I think really rewarding sort of event as I moved back to the Army. So I moved to the Army in 2010 as a senior executive. So I worked now we had Obama. I'd helped the Obama administration write its first executive order on sustainability. So 3 of those operative paragraphs came to our team. I wrote it, and they offered me a political appointed position in the Army. And I said, no, I don't want to be a political appointee. So then I eventually moved over there as a career SES and moved into the Army Secretariat. That's the civilian side. So I moved and had a policy remit for energy and sustainability in the Army for almost 8 years. I did a tour up in the White House, but it was really great to go back to the Army. If you heard earlier, I said I felt a little unfulfilled when I left as a captain. I felt like I hadn't lived that mission of a lifetime of service.
Mm-hmm.
I'd certainly had served in the UN and felt very pleased with the contributions, and I knew I saved lives. I knew people were alive today because of the work I'd done in the UN. But it was just great to come back to the Army, and
Yeah.
I really, really appreciated that. And so
I think it's undisputed if you look at the contributions you've made that you
yeah,
were
well,
able to complete a lot of service. So it's great stuff. What so that equation of the upstream resources versus the downstream, kind of dealing with the consequences of resource competition. What's your perspective now that you've seen both sides of the equation up close? So did it mature your view of that?
sure, my view. Um,
Did you come out with a different view of it?
well, I think we in the United States and the world are sort of in a race between how fast do we deplete our sort of natural resources, natural
Mm-hmm.
capitalism, and how much we can innovate and create with science and technology. So,
Yeah.
and where do I come down on that equation? It sort of depends on any given day or news. I am
Mm-hmm.
concerned that we are depleting our natural capital too fast and not addressing the real risks of climate change. But
Yeah.
I'm stoic. There's things I can't do, but what I can do in my time today is I help great companies that are concerned about this very question and are creating and deploying technologies that produce clean energy. So I do a lot of work for nuclear companies,
Hmm.
large scale desalination, social impact investing in the global south. So I just spend my time on the side of that equation that I can influence,
Yep.
and and reread my Stoic philosophy, and the things that
Right.
I can't influence. You know, the President Trump took us out of the Paris Accord. What can I do about that? Nothing. But President Trump is really pushing hard on nuclear power, which I'm supportive of, and I'm on two boards of nuclear reactor companies, and we're going to do great things. So
Yeah.
I harness the tailwinds when I can, and
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
so the resource competition is all in the system, right? So
that's right.
competition for
Yeah,
resources, exploiting it short term or investing long
yeah.
term. Super interesting. Well, your perspective is valued and undoubtedly part of the free lunch and happy hour program where you'll hold forth more fully on your views on the matter.
Yeah, I
That's
have to be careful. Sometimes
I can.
I go on and I realize people have
I
had enough.
totally and,
So
and things change, right? Since
yeah,
this podcast will be seen for a millennia, right, as a
yeah.
historical document, it'll all be out of date as we rotate
But
around the moon with all their energy creation. But anyway,
but again, so the podcast making connections to some of our West Point classmates. So I'm in the
yeah,
Army now. I'm a senior executive, and I travel and I go to Fort Hood, and I'm there, and somebody walks up and says, "Hey, sir, the chief of staff uh, of the Corps wants you to come by his office and just say hi, Colonel Joe Martin." So I go in there, and I haven't seen Joe in so long, right? And he's so gracious, and he's the chief
yeah,
of staff, right? I think he's a colonel. I think he's in a 1-star billet. The
yeah,
guy's probably pulling 15, 16-hour days, getting smoked every day.
right,
Um, and he was so generous with his time, and he talked about the Army and what it was like and
yeah,
his experiences. And I hope I was nice to him because, then fast forward, he comes to the Army staff as a 3-star,
yeah,
uh, and then as a 4-star. So, so that I'm in his office saying, "Hey, sir," and and now Joe and I
yeah,
both work for the same company as advisors. But the point is that sort of West Point connection. You never know where it's going to be. You never know
yeah,
who's there to help you. And I've been very, very blessed with the connections from West Point throughout my life, and just the nice gestures that people have done. And again, you've entered Pat Antonetti was in the Pentagon.
yeah.
Pete Bechtel and I went to air assault school together. Pete's the civilian deputy to G3 right now. He's probably the second most influential civilian in the Army,
Mm-hmm.
career civilian in the Army. So they all were very. Kristen French, she was a GO and then an SES. So
Yeah,
classmates really helped me out when I was in the building.
right. And to us, it's Pete, Joe, Kristen,
Yeah,
Roger.
Well,
but these
Roger
are,
was hard to keep track of, but
well, you gotta, I got a map on the wall over here with it lights up with little pins whenever he's moving around. He doesn't know I slipped a low jack in his
yeah.
backpack. But anyway, we got him tracked. Oh
So when I was in the
yeah,
Army, I went up for Projects Day for every
yeah,
year up until COVID. When I moved from the Army, I moved up to OSD. So I was at work for 3 years at OSD. I also went back to West Point. I funded programs at West Point. I'm now on an advisory board for the Department of Environment and Civil Engineering. And for our classmates, I just got to say, West Point is so much better
yeah,
across the board. All right. Across the board, it is so much better on all things, academics, military, the opportunities that cadets have. I mean, first of all, I wasn't high enough in our class to get a lot of them, but my son and all of his friends have done these amazing trips around the world,
yeah.
with industry, with units. So I just want to say from what I've seen, 14 years going, 16 years now going back and forth to West Point, except for COVID, the, the place is really good.
It really has come up in the world in terms of going back there. I myself been to some of the projects days, and um, I'm astonished at the level of quality that
Yeah.
is there. So I concur with your assessment.
And the infamous, just an example, the infamous F4 frogs have Frog Week, and the rest of the Corps hates Frog Week. But but through an exception to policy, F4 has an extra lieutenant who's the lieutenant in charge of Frog Week, and they've got an ops NCO for Frog Week, and they keep Frog, and so they do op orders and they plan Frog Week, and then they keep all this stuff secure, right? So they've got a higher level of security around their planning for Frog Week. So the whole craziness around Frog Week, and I give Matt Eigel, our classmate, credit for inventing Frog Week. I'm not sure that's true, but I
We're
give
going to
Matt
give it
Eigel
to him.
credit. Yeah, I'm going to give it to him. Anyway, so but it just they just do all of that, and they just do it. They just do it well.
What company did your son end up in? Just out of
He's in
curiosity.
A4,
A4.
so and
So
they had
he
to.
can watch the antics of the frogs across the way.
He can watch the antics. So, but he really likes being an A4, and they've kept the battalion name Wild West. They kept the Apaches.
There you go.
They can no longer say scalp them.
Well,
They had to lose the scalp them motto. But
it's a more enlightened time, so we have to
yeah,
give him that. That's great.
anyway.
So class of 27. So you're still very active. So retirement's just something that's a long way away, or where's
Yeah,
your head on that?
I can't really
Okay.
imagine not working. So, um, I've got a full plate of clients. I work about 30 hours a week. I
Okay.
feel that's half time. My wife thinks it's full time,
Yeah. Yeah.
but and I travel. So I worked in Europe, and I'm on the board of a UK company. But my plan would be probably to roll out of active advisory work and move towards board work. So
Yeah.
I want to keep doing that for another 10 years or so.
Okay,
I feel
great.
like I want to make a difference, and as long as I can contribute and make a difference around energy, sustainability, climate, I'm going to keep contributing.
It's a never-ending topic needing continued
Yeah.
revision
So
and upgrading of
yeah.
contribution. So that's a good idea. Yeah, that's great. I mean, looking back on it all, what we talked before we started recording about lessons taken from the body of the podcast. What specific lessons have you kind of drawn from your career, or kind of what are your big
Well,
takeaways from
certainly I've
such a
worked
diverse
hard and
career?
have some ability and, an inquisitive mind and can reinvent myself. Those are all personal traits, but, it's really about relations. It's
Hmm.
about people. And I didn't quite really recognize that enough probably when I was at West Point. And my son, and this may have been a factor in his choice to go to West Point. And so, I was wound pretty tight when I was in the Pentagon. Once or
Hmm.
twice I'd come home and my wife would look at me and she'd say, Rich, you and your Pentagon voice can get the hell out of the house and you can come back when you can talk to me like my husband.
Yeah.
So I was wound tight. But anyway, my son said to me, he said, Dad, because he said, you never laugh as loud or as much or as easily as when you're with your West Point friends. And he said, any one of your West Point, then he went on and said, any one of your West Point classmates could say things to you that if anyone else said, you would rip their head off. And instead, you just laugh at it. Which I think is a testament to some of our experiences as young people at West Point, right?
That's a keen insight from that young man. That's a keen insight. I think you could probably apply that more broadly to all of us, right?
That's right. So if you meet someone from West Point or from class of 86, they've got the benefit of the doubt. They can joke with you. They can, they can do things that we've just got that rapport because we went through that place together.
Yeah. 100%. That's a keen insight. And what a way to bring it all home. Rich, is there anything we haven't covered in your amazing story you'd like to share?
No, I think that's about it. Still amazing, looking for.
Yeah.
No, it's been great. I look back and certainly made a lot of bad decisions, or not the best decisions, but they've sort of self-corrected through over time.
They've self-corrected. Whatever corrected them, I think they've self-corrected. You've done very well, and we're very proud of you.
Paul. I thank you too for doing what you're doing. Oral history of our class. This is amazing.
My pleasure. It was a pleasure to have been your punching bag all those years ago. So, Rich, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe button. With over 900 living graduates, we have a lot of stories to tell, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.